More layoffs have been announced at Univision, and most of these will be taking place within Fusion. Now, Fusion is a TV network, and they used to have a website, but the website eventually got rebranded to be called Splinter. It's kind of complicated, but if you've been following me over the past several years, you would know that I worked for Vice, and then eventually I did work for Fusion. Eventually, Fusion became a hyper-partisan left-wing website, but it wasn't always that way. I've had many conversations with the higher-ups at Fusion, and I feel like I kind of saw something happen within the company that led to its downfall and the problems it's been facing since its inception. So this video today is going to talk a bit about the current news on Univision and the Fusion Media Group, which involves the Gawker media companies like Gizmodo and Kotaku, etc. And I'm also going to talk about my personal experience at Fusion and why I think a push for social justice narratives led the company to its current failing state. Before we get started, make sure you go to youtube.com/timcast if you're not already there and hit that subscribe button and click the little bell. That bell means you are telling YouTube you want to get notified when I post a video, because believe it or not, just subscribing will not do it. YouTube actually won't tell you if I post a video if you're subscribed. It's weird. I don't get it either. But also make sure you go to patreon.com/timcast and become a patron today. There are many different tiers to choose from. Most notably is tier 1 at $10 per month. You get access to behind-the-scenes photos and videos and bonus commentary when available, so please consider supporting my work by becoming a patron today. The first story from Media Moves: Univision Planeta axed. Fusion and Univision Digital hit with layoffs, more job cuts coming. Univision is continuing its downsizing with another wave of layoffs. Multiple sources say at least 70 people from Fusion and Univision Digital lost their jobs yesterday and today. Job cuts kicked off yesterday at Fusion and Univision Planeta, an environmental division that has been eliminated. About 40 positions were slashed. Today's round hit the digital team, shedding another 30 employees and almost half the staffers from that unit. An insider says Univision Network News Director Daniel Coronel held a staff meeting today to address the situation. He warned this was the first round of cuts and that what was coming is catastrophic, with the next wave of layoffs expected in June. He told shell-shocked staffers Univision had to cut $300 million by eliminating programs and jobs. And from Vanity Fair, a complete S-show. As Fusion Media implodes, will the Gawker orphans hit the block? 2 years after its splashy acquisition of the former Gawker sites, Isaac Lee's Fusion Media Group is careening into a new era of belt-tightening and downsizing. Will Penske or Diller be enticed to help them unload what's left? I don't want to read the entire story, but I do want to pull out one important note before I move on and explain to you my experiences working at Fusion and how I think social justice impacted the company negatively. In reference to Isaac Lee of Univision, it says, his biggest coup was the August 2016 acquisition of a half-dozen orphaned Gawker media brands, including Gizmodo, Jezebel, and Deadspin. Univision bought the sites for $135 million in a bankruptcy auction that played out in the wake of Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel's legal jihad against Gawker founder Nick Denton. When I joined Fusion, there wasn't a whole lot going on. It was a very basic and barren media platform. They had a TV channel, but a lot of their content was kind of general news. They had a nightly news program. I was told that they wanted to capture what Vice had. When I left Vice in 2014, it was very different to where Vice is today, though it probably was heading in the direction of what brought it to where it is today. That's a whole other story. So I looked at Fusion as an opportunity to start something new from the ground up with more authority, with more resources, and more control. However, after a few months, the company slowly started to change. Inside the offices, they actually had posters on the wall that said something along the lines of, "We will not be partisan." The idea was to just tell the news like it was, and I really liked that. What I wanted to do was create kind of what I'm already doing now, but with more resources, so a lot more traveling, on-the-ground reporting, and just kind of being rational and trying to capture the entirety of the story and not just one perspective, not just one narrative. But eventually something changed, and I don't exactly know why. I can speculate, and keep in mind everything I'm going to tell you about this company is coming from one person's perspective. So I don't entirely know why they do what they do, and I did leave the company at the end of August in 2016, but I'm just going to share with you my personal perspective. I had a meeting with a high-ranking individual at Fusion, and I asked them what they were trying to do. I was a senior correspondent. I was supposed to be hosting videos and documentaries and doing high-profile content for the company, but for some reason there were roadblocks here and there. So I had this meeting and I said, what do you want to do? And they said, look, young people are progressive and we want to side with the audience. That is our goal. I warned them that this was probably a bad idea. First of all, the market for social justice websites is saturated. But not only that, social justice websites aren't really that big, at least at the time I was talking about this. You had a few websites that were actually sub-websites of other networks, Jezebel, for instance. And while they probably get a decent amount of traffic, maybe enough to support their own existence, Gawker was the flagship. Now, Gawker isn't innocent either. They're absolutely partisan. But the idea of having this startup, which was backed by two major corporations, ABC and Univision, and then try and make the main narrative about social justice or progressive politics, I thought that was probably a bad idea because you would pigeonhole the company. My advice was, look, if you want to create a platform for these kinds of politics and this narrative, then you want to create kind of a subcategory, maybe something to exist underneath your parent brand. Your parent brand needs to be relatable, cool, and relatively neutral. Certainly you can have an opinion and you can believe some things are right and some things are wrong. Like, I'm pretty sure every major media platform in the country doesn't like racism, albeit some media platforms are a bit more extreme as to what their definition of racism is. We all have editorial standards, and we all do agree on certain things being okay and certain things being not okay, just to varying degrees. So that's what I said. But I was told that's not what they're going to do. And my general understanding was that marketing consultants had told the company that young people love social justice, that young people are progressive, and the company, if they expect to survive in the next few years, they need to push that narrative because that's what the audience wants. Instead of being a media company that's going to produce news and tell you what you need to know, whether you like it or not, they became a company that was chasing what the marketing division was telling them, that young people want to be pandered to, that young people want to hear their own opinions repeated back at them. It is entirely true that people much prefer to hear their own opinion. And it wasn't just one meeting. There was another meeting with many more staff members where someone asked a high-ranking official, how do we want to report this story? Are we going to be left, right, middle? What are we doing? And the response was the same. We are going to side with the audience on this one. Side with the audience. What does that mean? I mean, if you break it down, it actually means the company's intentions were to just tell the audience whatever they wanted to hear. I asked this person, so what you're saying is, if there is a factual news story, but it would be offensive to our audience, we don't report it. And I was told, yes, I think that's fair to say. And to me, this is when I realized they will not survive. Because it's not just about trying to push a narrative that's going to hurt your company. Certainly, you can make a lot of money pushing a narrative. Many people are doing it, and that's one of the biggest problems we have in media. But these were individuals who had no core values. They were simply doing what the marketers told them to do. Many of the companies that are hyper-partisan emerged from individuals who were passionate about those politics and had a connection to that community. So when you look at certain websites on the left, they grew organically with these politics. When you look at websites on the right, it's the exact same thing. But look to a media brand that tried to become hyper-partisan in one direction, and you're going to look at a community, you're going to look at individuals who don't actually understand who they're talking to. So what ends up happening? The content is crap, no one wants to watch it, and the company won't work. And this is why I said, if you've got a newsroom full of traditional journalists, you need to play to your strength and be more of a general brand. Don't try and chase an agenda because you're not going to effectively communicate with this audience. And sure enough, that's what happened. A lot of the content they put out was offensive to the people they were trying to pander to. And I know pander might be a bit hyperbolic, but they actually said they wanted to side with the audience. And what happened? Well, now we can look back and see all of the people who have been laid off, all of the attempts to keep this platform going, rebranding, breaking off the website, changing its name, and changing what they were producing, because none of it seems to work. There was an event being put on by Fusion, and they had to bring on an external host in addition to some of the other staff because of the nature of the event. I asked why I wasn't allowed to participate, and they said because the event was racist. Because I was perceivably white, I wasn't allowed to participate. I view that as illegal discrimination. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly what happened or why, but I was actually told that I was being excluded from an event of production because of my skin color. And this is what happens when a company doesn't understand what's going on and tries to just adhere to what the marketing department tells them. Here's what you have to do and here's why you have to do it, but they don't actually understand any of it and they don't actually connect with their audience in any meaningful way, and then they actually discriminate against me for the color of my skin even though they were wrong and I'm mixed. And this to me was another big problem with the company. They were trying to adhere to some kind of narrative, and in doing so they excluded me based on how they perceived my color instead of actually talking to me about my experiences. I don't think that social justice or political pandering is what caused the downfall. I think it contributed to their downfall. And I don't think it's entirely social justice that did it. I think it was a failed attempt to pander to a community they didn't understand. But the company was rife with problems, and probably still is, outside of their politics. It seems like they just wasted a ton of money all the time, and when certain things worked, they didn't pursue them. And I have no idea why. Shortly after I left, Univision had to cut 6% of the workforce, including the newly unionized Fusion. From Deadline, they said, a week after most of the staff at Univision's Fusion.net voted to join the Writers Guild of America, the company announced sweeping layoffs that could hit the English language service hardest. Univision said today that it will undergo restructuring that could slash as many as 250 positions, accounting for nearly 6% of its workforce, it told the Washington Post. There's a lot of reasons that layoffs might happen, but the reason I bring this up is that it's not just about their political agenda that results in their failures. Fusion is rife with bad business decisions, and one of them was trying to push a narrative on a community they didn't understand. Ultimately, I left the company, and to all the people who still work that I know, I wish them all the best success. I actually still have some friends who work there, but I feel like today we have a bit of a challenge in that everyone is trying to push some kind of political agenda in order to get traffic. We don't really have news anymore, and we might not actually need it, technically. You know, when it comes to breaking news stories, we kind of know what happened. It's a crazy thing. You know, there's going to be a March for Science in DC, and I assure you, everyone's going to hear exactly what happens the moment it happens because everyone down there is tweeting and posting photos. What we do need journalists for is objective investigations, documentary, and in-depth reports. But more and more companies are looking to produce content on a day-to-day basis that's going to allow them to generate revenue in the long run. And those bigger projects are slowly getting slashed because they tend to be fruitless. They're not going to make a whole lot of money, and they're going to cost a whole lot of money. So let me present with you a potential scenario. Let's say you go to an investor and say, I am going to need $300,000. I'm going to hire a couple people, and we're going to do an investigation into this big corporation. The investor will ask you, at the end of the year, what do I get? And your response can only be, we don't know because we didn't do an investigation. But if what we think is true, then you will get a lot of press. That's a very, very risky investment. But what happens when someone says, I'm going to need $20,000, I'm going to pay some college kids crap, $5, $10 per article, and they're going to crank out emotive, pandering content that's going to get a lot of clicks, and in a couple months you'll double your income. Well, where do you think the investor is going to put their money? Because a lot of people who invest don't care about what the product is, they care, does the business make sense? Is it going to function? I do think there are a lot of investors who care about whether or not they're going to be contributing to the betterment of society, but everyone kind of disagrees as to what the betterment of society is. So when you look at some investors, if you said, we want to make a far left website that's going to push policies that make the world better, they'll agree to that. And if you say the same thing to someone who's right-wing about producing right-wing content, they're going to say the same thing to that. Hey, I think this does great. I like these ideas, and I will absolutely invest in this. Certainly they do want to see some money, they want to see a return, and some people like to just give money to make sure that something good is happening, especially if they have the money to give. But if you go to any of these investors who do have political leanings and say, we want to be objective, most of them are going to say, oh, what does that mean? You're a liberal, you're a conservative, where does that put us? they don't think you're necessarily going to be doing something good. It's going to be harder for you to produce media that is, dare I say it, objective. What's happening at Fusion, what's happening at Univision, isn't unique to just this one company. A lot of companies have tried pandering, a lot of companies have tried clickbait, it doesn't work, and a lot of companies have gone out of business. In my opinion, I think we're going to see a massive collapse of the big media companies over the next few decades, maybe even sooner, because people have a choice as to what they can read, and they're going to choose their echo chamber because it feels good. So people are gonna go read what they think better connects them to a community. They're gonna choose their tribe and say, this is my tribe, this is what's right, and they're gonna read whatever content they can that's going to make them feel good. And this is going to create divisions, but it's also going to dismantle the gigantic, monolithic media companies of the past. And in the future, we're gonna have a bunch of really small companies, and eventually, I think we might not even have companies at all. We might just have individuals. You know, people like me and other personalities on YouTube. You come to me for news, you come to me for commentary, and I think this might be how the future turns out. Unless something changes, and it probably will, I think the future is going to be heavily personality driven. It already is compared to where it was 20 years ago. So I guess to wrap this all together, Fusion and Univision are facing more layoffs, with more layoffs to come, and it's not surprising. This is the company that bought the Gawker Media Group that people have already been very critical of. These media companies are very divisive. When you try to pander to a community in which you are not a part of, it's not going to work out well. And keep in mind, many of these communities aren't large enough to support a company as large as Fusion anyway. I don't think this is the sole reason for the problems at Fusion. I think they're just generally mismanaged and bad at what they do. But I certainly think this was one of the biggest contributing factors as to why the company has continued to slip up time and time again. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I saw this news and I had some people hit me up about it, some people that I know and who used to work at Fusion. So I thought today I would just riff on how I feel about what happened to the company and just give some of my personal experiences having worked at Fusion now that they're facing more layoffs. But let me know how you feel about these companies, how you feel about media, and we'll keep the conversation going in the comments below. So thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned. New videos every day at 4 p.m. and I will see you all then.